Grace is the church word for today. People use grace in all kinds of different ways, in all kinds of different contexts. But in church, it's a prime word. It's a word that's central to our life together. John's prologue says that grace has brought us together, that it sustains the continued life of the church in spite of all of our stupidities and our failures. But I ask you in the worship prep to make your own definition of grace. And my guess is that if you did try, you used the word love. And love in itself is another problem word. So in order to talk about grace, first we have to kind of clarify what we mean by love. I love ice cream. I love basketball. Last night as I watched the inductions into the Hall of Fame, I love Coach Pop. I love my children. I love all children. Same word. Did you notice? Different meanings. Did you notice? You do the same thing. We talk about love in our relationships with one another. And often our problem is that we say we love each other, but the other person understands that word in a different way. How do they hear what we are trying to say? I love my country. The other person says, I love my country too. We may have very different ideas about what love of country really means. How can we hear what other people mean by the word love, even when we're listening as hard as we can? Even dictionaries give 5 or 6 definitions of what the word is. They're not much help at all. It's kind of a take your pick thing. If you've been in a church long enough, you probably have heard that there are 3 words in Greek for love. Distinctive words that show different aspects of love. Probably the speaker told you that there is eros, which is physical love or romantic love, or that all of things associated with that kind of love. Eros is the root of the word erotic, which may or may not have anything to do with love. The second is philos, love for neighbor, family, sibling, love for others. Philanthropy, its root is philos. The dictionary says that philanthropy is giving away money in large amounts to organizations that help people. Well, there may or may not be philos that has anything to do with what's being done. Agape. This was my good laugh for the week. It came when the dictionary wrote, a Greek word that is sometimes pronounced agape, which means amazed with mouths wide open. It also tells us that agape is a type of love that is not sexual and is not concerned with yourself, used especially in Christianity. To be honest, there are places and parts of Christianity that are sometimes completely self-serving, concerned with self-feeling good, concerned with easing people's consciences instead of growing them, concerned with exercising power or keeping people happy or stroking egos. And tell me, who besides a dictionary says that sex can't be a symbolic act of selfless love? Is there a way through all of this kind of confusion, even in what we think these Greek words mean? Well, a professor I had a long time the way loved Greek so much that he studied all of the evolution of the language through history, before the first century and past it. He said that in the time of the New Testament, the Greek language had reached the height of its complexity and its subtlety. He taught us Greek understandings of love that are deeper and richer than these simplistic conceptions. Eros. It might happen to be physical love, but more accurately, it is love that we have because of the attractiveness of the object. So, I eros ice cream. I eros mountains more than ice cream, because there is an attraction that's almost mystical to me about being in them. I love golf. It's an amazing place of sanctuary for the mind where if you're thinking about something else, you can't play it. It's not love when I love because of what you do for me. That's an interesting twist on narcissism and self-love, isn't it? Eros is more than the mystery of infatuation, because the object of the love pulls us toward it. Eros can grow into a deeper kind of love than an attraction, but it's a shallow love, and it always is kind of mixed with some self-interest. Love has to grow beyond who and what the other is or does. Philos. For Greeks, philos is love because of a mutual commitment or an association or something that puts us together and draws us into a kind of relationship. Fans loving the Spurs, a service club where we are a common bond of helping, a common cause, a weekly foursome that shares life and how each other are doing. Marriages that built on a dream of what a marriage can bring to both of you together. So long as that common bond is there, love for the other person is a deep reality. But when that mutual commitment is lost or life takes us somewhere else, the love fades. Marriages that start with dreams of a Camelot we both hope for are doomed. There is no Camelot. Philos is a love because of a common bond. Love needs to last when the bond changes. Agape, not agape, is a deeper and purer love. It's a love that's sourced in the subject, the lover who is doing the loving. It is compassion and mercy. It is love that reaches beyond itself to the needs or the desires of another. It is love without self-interest, unchanging in the changes of ties and activities and mutual bonds. It is love that wills to live for the sake of the other. In church, when we say love, we mean agape. Love without thought for what's in it for us. Now, none of us have ever lived 24/7 agape. But we've seen it in ourselves, haven't we? We've recognized its uniqueness and its power when it happens. Somewhere we have this model of a complete lack of self-interest that we hope for, of an extension of giving without regard for return or even the worthiness of the person we are loving. Agape clarifies the definition of all the ambiguities of love. Are there any questions? I'm serious. We have to get this before we get to the other. Okay. So now we can talk about grace. John says that God is love, period. It is not God might love or God can love if you do. It is not any kind of thing except indicative mood. This is who God is. God is love. John uses agape in the original. And agape is the love that's in the original before the creating. God is agape. John claims that spirit preceded matter itself, the atoms and all the galaxies. And that spirit is love, agape, that has no self-interest, only concern for the other. That great poem by James Weldon Johnson called The Creation puts words in God's mouth. God smiled and the light broke. God said, I'm lonely. I'll make me a world. The need to love in agape is about having to extend ourselves so that the other will be loved. And that agape of God brought the whole thing into being. Now, if we can get our heads around that at all, then these metaphors of light and word, John says, spirit projected the divine nature into the creation. It was created in love. We are created in love, in God's agape. God spoke things and said they were good and put them into existence. The core of everything that exists is an extension of the very nature of God. We have goodness all around us. We have a core of who we are. And that love is what gave us the choice of how we will live with it. So the reason that sometimes love is all ambiguous and hard to understand is the choices we make for lesser loves. John says the Word became flesh and lived among us, full of grace and truth. There's that word, that church word, grace. God wanted to clarify the ambiguities of divine love. Spirit's love required further extension, expression of itself into some reality that limited human people like you and me could see and hear and watch and understand. We would get it if we saw it lived. God cared so much for the world that God not only wanted us to love, God wanted us to understand and take joy when we saw it in the world and in ourselves. God wanted us to have better, more reliable access to the very nature of the true reality of the core of everything. So God put love into matter, carbon-based matter, in creating a world. God put a unique expression of agape love into a human life to make it clear so that we would know and grasp where true human life is sourced. this word, this speaking, this expressing, this creating was unique at its core. Its love was full of grace and truth. There's that church word again. And now we can explain it. Grace is lived love. Agape, alive and breathing. Selfless love, active out in the decisions and the actions of a human person. Guess who John says that was? And when we learn the meaning of that strange and greatest word, grace, it is because we see it acted out in the life of a human person. This human person that we have as a model for ourself, for a life that is full and true. Now we can talk about Jesus being grace incarnate all along, grace in the flesh, grace full. But there's something that we forget about this. The grace was in the creating. God's nature was extended to the whole creation. That means that we all have a depth of selfless love in us. We see it, we can recognize it in our motives and actions with people that we truly love. We see it in the astounded selfless gifts that people give. The people who go way beyond a gift that makes them feel good. Or a gift because they like a cause or an association or a thing where there's a common bond. A gift that's just a gift. We see it in giving when people cannot help but respond for no other reason than they saw a need or a desire or a place they could do some good. We see it from people in this room. And we see it in people who would never walk in this room. God is love. Grace is here. Grace is born in every act of selfless love by Spirit who took a big risk. In church, we are not the exclusive owners of God's grace. There are constant acts of selfless love, but we have a history and a life together and a witness of a living model who lived grace completely. And we know we need that help. And for us, He is the divining life of love lived. He is the definition of grace. Because of that, we can see grace when it happens better than some can. So we can live it better than some can. And we have a greater responsibility to be true to that grace than others if we think we have a deeper understanding than others have. We are here because others lived grace before us. That's how we get it. Grace only comes in the flesh. We have examples of humans right in this room who are in the uniqueness of their individual creation, recognize the Spirit of grace in them. We see it, and we live that agape. They live it with us and for us, and we live it through them. And they are the ones who live grace to us and never think about the carrier. We may not be full of grace and truth, but we have more than we need, and we can do more than we imagine. All we have to do is put the agape to work, and it becomes grace. Put it to work without thinking about ourselves at all, and we will see what grace can do out there in the wild. And for God's sake, what in the world would ever keep us from living it? Amen.